Heading home, I found a bizarre device hidden in my husband's bike bag. Terrified, I took it straight to the police. Hi, welcome to my channel. Let me tell you my new story.
On my way to my mother's house after a frantic call at 2 a.m. reporting she'd fallen and been unconscious, I pulled over at a deserted gas station to refuel. As I opened the bag my husband had prepared for me to find my wallet, my hand touched a cold, heavy metal object flashing red. Something prevented me from calling him. I changed direction, driving straight to the nearest police station. When I placed it on the desk, the officer immediately said, "Don't touch it. Stay away from it." Worse. And in that moment, I understood everything had gone off track. The fact that you're here means everything to me. Now I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below with where you're watching from, your country, your city, your corner of the world. Let's see how far this community reaches. Note some elements of this story are fictional, included for narrative and educational value. Names and locations are coincidental, but the lesson at the heart of it is something I hope stays with you. The light in Harlow Creek dies slowly. By 5:30 on that late November Friday, it had already pulled back behind the western hills, leaving nothing but a bruised sky and the faint smell of dry leaves drifting through my studio window. I always left it cracked just enough to keep the old wooden frame from swelling shut overnight. I was sitting at my editing desk, one knee tucked underneath me, staring at a photograph of two people who looked completely painfully happy. A couple from Clarksville married the previous Saturday's Stringlights, a live bluegrass band, the groom crying quietly during the vows. My job was to take that moment and make it permanent. I was good at that, capturing what other people felt. I looked at the bride's smile for a long time, and something moved through me, quiet, unnamed, like a draft through a room before you realize a window is open. I didn't think about it too hard. I never did. My name is Serena Hale, 32 years old, freelance photographer, Harlow Creek, Tennessee. Weddings, family portraits, the occasional corporate shoot when the bills needed topping off. I built the business from nothing, a borrowed camera, a free website template, word of mouth, crawling slow as honey through a small southern town. It was mine in every way that mattered. The house was Garrison's, technically. He'd bought it 2 years before we met, a 4-bedroom colonial on Caldwell Ridge Road, with crown molding a wraparound porch and a left side that sagged slightly. We always said we'd fix that sag. We never did. Garrison Hale was 44, a senior architect at a firm in Nashville, the kind of man who commanded a room without raising his voice. Patient, measured. In 4 years of marriage, I'd never once seen him lose his temper in public. He always knew exactly what to say. He came home at 7 just as I was saving my last round of edits. I heard his key in the lock, his bag hit the hallway floor, his footsteps crossed the hardwood. Then he appeared in the studio doorway, dark coat loosened, tie, the composed exhaustion of a man at the end of a long week. He looked at me the way he always did, not at the screen, at me. "Hey, you," he said. He kissed the top of my head, asked how the Clarksville shoot had come out, asked if I'd eaten since lunch, said the right things in the right order at exactly the right temperature, and then drifted toward the kitchen to start dinner. 4 years of marriage teaches you the shape of another person's habits. After a while, you stop seeing the habits. You just see the shape. We ate at the kitchen table around 8 roasted chicken, a bottle of red that was mostly gone before we finished the main course. The conversation moved the way it always did on Friday's work, whether the neighbor's dog getting into the side yard again. Easy, unremarkable. 3 times during dinner, Garrison's phone buzzed against the table. Each time he glanced down, turned the screen face down, and picked the conversation back up exactly where he'd left it. No apology, no explanation, just a smooth practice motion that made the interruption disappear. I noticed. I always noticed. I didn't say anything. 4 years of marriage also teaches you which questions to stop asking. He'd always been private about his phone client drama billing disputes. You don't want to hear it, and the answers were always just plausible enough that pressing further felt like making something out of nothing. So I had learned somewhere along the way to leave certain doors unopened. After dinner, he excused himself to his home office. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. He'd been locking that door for nearly a year. I stood in the hallway for a moment longer than I meant to, listening to a house that had gone completely still. Then I went to bed. I lay in the middle of our king-sized bed, Garrison's half untouched, still made, and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow on its lowest setting. My thoughts drifted the way they do, in that loose hour before sleep, the invoice I needed to send the battery pack I kept forgetting to charge the Clarksville bride's impossible smile. And then, without warning, to March, 8 months ago, the staircase off the main hallway. I didn't remember falling. That was the part that had always sat wrong with me quietly in places I didn't examine too often. One moment, I was carrying a coffee mug downstairs. The next, I was waking up in a hospital room with bandaging around my head and a nurse asking if I knew what day it was. Concussion, the doctors said. Consistent with a fall from that height? Accident, the responding officer said. Routine check. No further action required. Garrison had stood beside my hospital bed with his hand over mine. His face did all the right things, worry, relief, that particular softness that comes when someone you love has been hurt. He'd stayed the whole first night, brought me home in the morning, made soup. I had believed every word, every expression, every bowl of soup. Now lying in the dark, I turned that memory over slowly, like a stone I'd found in my pocket without knowing how it got there. I reached for the silver-framed wedding photo on my nightstand. A younger version of me looked back, hair-loose face, wide open, both hands wrapped around Garrison's arm like the ground beneath me was absolutely, permanently solid. She looked so certain. I set the frame down. The clock read 11. The house settled once deep and low the way old wood does when the temperature drops. Outside, the Tennessee hills had gone fully dark. I closed my eyes. I couldn't have known that these were the last quiet hours of my old life, that before the sun came up again, everything I thought I understood would be something else entirely. Sleep, when it finally came hard. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember anything at all until the phone went off, and when it did, it didn't ease me awake the way an alarm might. It detonated. A single violent pulse of sound that yanked me from nothing into everything all at once. And before I'd even registered what was happening, I was already sitting upright, heart slamming, one hand slapping at the nightstand in the dark. 2:17 in the morning. The digits on the clock were the first real thing I saw. The second thing I saw was Garrison. He was lying exactly where he'd been when I'd fallen asleep on his side facing the wall, his breathing slow and even beneath the blanket. The phone had rung loud enough to rattle the picture frame on the nightstand, loud enough to wake anyone in a 30-foot radius. Garrison hadn't moved a muscle. I noticed that. Filed it somewhere without knowing why. Then the screen lit up again with a second ring and I grabbed it. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was a man's, rough, slightly breathless the way people sound when they've been running or when fear has stripped the polish off their words. He said his name was Jim, that he lived 2 properties down from my mother Eleanor's place out in Millfield. Said he'd seen lights on at an odd hour, went to check, found her at the bottom of the porch steps. She was conscious when he got there, but fading fast. The paramedics were already on their way. She was asking for me. I don't remember saying anything coherent in response. I remember the word mom coming out of my mouth, and then the floor was cold under my feet, and the bedside lamp was on, and I was shaking. I tried calling Eleanor's cell. 4 rings. Voicemail. I tried the landline I'd grown up dialing from memory. It rang 8 times, and no one picked up. She was 71 years old and lived alone on a property with no close neighbors on either side. And if the paramedics had her, she wasn't going to be answering her phone. That was the logic I used. That was the shape I forced the situation into so I could breathe. I reached over and grabbed Garrison's shoulder. He came awake slowly, or appeared to. Blinked, turned over, looked at me with the particular unfocused expression of someone dragged out of deep sleep. I told him everything in the compressed, fractured way you talk, when your brain is moving faster than your mouth. Eleanor, the fall. The neighbor's call. No answer on her phone. I had to go. I had to go right now. He sat up, rubbed his face, listened. Then he said, "God, Serena." Okay, let me think. He was calm. I remember that clearly, the way his voice had that steadying quality, like he was already solving the problem while I was still inside the panic. Under any other circumstance, I would have found it reassuring. "I can't leave tonight." He said it quietly, the way you say something you've already made peace with. Mercer's presenting the Aldine project first thing. The whole submission timeline depends on my section being ready. If I don't deliver, it doesn't just affect me. There's a whole team counting on those files. I stared at him. "She's your mother too," I said, or something like it. "I know." He reached out and took my hand. His palm was dry and warm. "And I'm sorry. I hate this. But you can make it there in 3 hours. You'll be with her before sunrise. I'll follow as soon as the presentation wraps noon latest." I knew how much rode on that project. I'd heard about Aldine for months, the deadlines, the client pressure, the hours he'd already put in. I understood it. I didn't want to be the person who made everything harder. So I swallowed what was rising in my chest, and I said, "Fine. I'll call you when I get there." He nodded. "I'll get your bag ready while you change." I didn't argue. I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my face, pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt with the mechanical efficiency of someone operating on adrenaline and no sleep. When I came back out, Garrison was gone. I could hear him downstairs, the soft thud of the garage door, the faint sounds of movement below. He was down there for about 15 minutes. I didn't think to wonder why packing a travel bag took 15 minutes. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying Eleanor's number again. Still no answer. I told myself that was normal. I told myself she was with the paramedics. I told myself a lot of things in those 15 minutes. When Garrison came back upstairs, my overnight bag was in his hand, zipped neat handles together. He carried it out to my car, started the engine, let it run in the cold for 2 minutes so the heater would be working by the time I settled in. He opened the driver's side door for me and stood there with an expression that I had no reason then to read as anything other than concern. "Drive safe," he said. "Text me when you're on the highway." He kissed my forehead. His lips were cold. Quick. I backed out of the driveway and turned onto Caldwell Ridge Road, and out of habit I glanced in the rearview mirror. Garrison was still standing on the front porch. He hadn't gone back inside. He wasn't waving. He was just standing there in the dark, perfectly still, one arm at his side, watching the taillights of my car until the road curved and the house disappeared. A cold feeling moved through me fast and uninvited. I told myself it was worry. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that anyone would stand in the doorway watching their wife drive away at 2 a.m. if they were concerned about her. I pressed the accelerator and let Route 7 pull me forward into the dark. What I didn't see, what I wouldn't understand until Walsh played me the audio transcript 6 days later, recovered from a wire intercept between Garrison and a number registered to Sabrina, was what happened the moment my taillights disappeared around the bend on Caldwell Ridge Road. He had gone back inside. He had picked up his phone. He had typed a message that Walsh's team would later recover in full and place into evidence. And according to the person on the other end of that exchange, who would eventually describe it in a federal cooperation statement, he had been smiling when he sent it. Route 7 at 3 a.m. is not a road. It is a tunnel. The pine trees on both sides press so close to the shoulder that the headlights barely reach them before the dark swallows everything back up. No streetlights, no oncoming traffic, no red taillights ahead to follow. Just the cone of my own beams cutting through a rising ground fog that had started crawling out of the tree line somewhere around mile marker 40, slow and deliberate, like it had been waiting for me. I'd driven this stretch of highway a dozen times over the years, visits to Eleanor holiday weekends, the occasional long weekend when the city felt like too much. I knew this road. But knowing a road in daylight and knowing it at 3 a.m. alone with your heart still running ahead of the rest of you are two entirely different things. I turned on my worship playlist, the same one I played every morning before a shoot, familiar voices, familiar chords, the kind of music that had always made the inside of my car feel like a small, safe place. I needed that right now. I needed something that felt like a normal morning, even if nothing about this was normal. Please let her be okay. I said it out loud to the windshield, to the dark, to whoever was listening. Please just let me get there and let her be okay. I was doing 72 in a 65 zone. I hadn't noticed until I looked down. Somewhere around mile marker 53, the car started to feel different. Not dramatically, nothing you'd pull over for, nothing that would make you call a mechanic. Just a subtle heaviness in the frame, a faint vibration coming up through the steering column that didn't quite match the texture of the road. Route 7 had its rough patches, I knew that, but this felt like something beneath the surface rather than on it. Like the car was carrying more than it should be. Probably needs a tire rotation. Maybe the alignment's off. I filed it away with the particular efficiency of someone who has too many other things to worry about. I'd take it in next week. I'd schedule it Monday morning. The fuel gauge pulled my attention next. The amber warning light was glowing softly on the dash low fuel. I stared at it for a second, confused. Garrison had mentioned filling the tank 3 days ago. I was almost certain of it. A casual comment over dinner, the kind of domestic detail that lodges in memory without you trying. Filled up on the way home. We're good for a while. 3 days. I hadn't driven more than 40 miles since then. I didn't have an explanation. I tucked the confusion into the same drawer as the vibration and kept driving. But somewhere at the very edge of my thoughts, something shifted, small, quiet, unnameable, like a thread pulled just slightly out of place. The Ridgeway gas and stop sign came out of the fog at mile marker 61, orange and white neon, buzzing against the dark, and I made the decision before I'd fully thought it through. Pull in. Top off the tank, splash cold water on my face, get back on the road. The lot was empty except for a pickup parked sideways near the air pump and a single employee visible through the plate glass window, a young guy with his chin dropping toward his chest behind the register fighting a losing battle against the 3 a.m. gravity that pulls at everyone working the overnight shift. The fluorescent lights inside cast the kind of flat greenish glow that makes everything look slightly wrong. I pulled up to the nearest pump, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me like a door swung open sharp damp, carrying the smell of pine resin and wet asphalt. I ran my card, started the pump, and climbed back into the driver's seat to wait. And that's when I reached into my bag. I needed my water bottle, which I thought I'd packed. I unzipped the main compartment and felt around travel-sized toiletries, a change of clothes phone charger, the familiar soft edges of things I'd packed 100 times before. My hand moved to the side pocket where I usually kept my wallet. Something was in the way. Not a wallet. Not anything soft. My fingers closed around something cold, smooth, and completely rigid, dense, in a way that suggested weight distributed deliberately, not accidentally. I pulled it out slowly, the way you pull something out when your hand already suspects something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. A black metal box roughly the size of a large fist. No label, no logo, no marking of any kind on the surface, just matte finish metal, a small panel on one side, and a single indicator light on the top corner blinking red. Slow, regular, patient. I held it under the dome light of my car and turned it over in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. The seams were clean, not a consumer product, not something you'd find in a hardware store. The light blinked again. Red, pause, red, pause. I had no framework for what I was holding, no reference point. I turned it to examine the side panel, and my thumb, just my thumb moving without instruction, grazed a small raised switch along the edge. The red light went yellow. The beeping started immediately. Not an alarm sound, not a notification, something faster and more insistent than either of those. A rhythmic pulse, even and mechanical, filling the cold cabin of my car, with a sound that had no business existing in a normal life. My body reacted before my mind did I set the box down on the passenger seat as carefully as if it were made of water, both hands trembling and pulled back against the driver's door. The beeping continued. Yellow light. Steady rhythm. Perfectly calm in the way that only things with no feelings can be calm. I sat there and looked at it. Then I looked at my phone. Then I looked at it again. There was a voice in my head. Not panic, not reason, exactly. Something lower and older than either. And it said very clearly, "Do not call Garrison." In 4 years of marriage, Garrison had been the first call. For everything. Flat tire on I-40, a difficult client who'd threatened to sue, the morning after the staircase. But not this. Whatever this was, some part of me already understood that this call right now, with this box sitting yellow lit on my passenger seat in an empty gas station parking lot at 3 a.m, was not a call I could make to my husband. I didn't know why I understood that. I just did. I don't know exactly when I decided to drive to the sheriff's substation instead of pulling over and calling 911 from the side of the road. Maybe it was the beeping. The sound had a quality to it that made me not want to be sitting still in a dark parking lot with it. Maybe it was something more basic than that. Some animal understanding that if you are holding something you don't recognize and it is making sounds you've never heard before, you drive toward the most lit building you can find, and you do not stop until you get there. The Harlow Creek Sheriff's Substation on Greer Mill Road was a low, flat-roofed building made of red brick, older than it looked, with a flagpole out front where the stars and stripes moved in the cold pre-dawn wind. At 3:15 in the morning, it was the only lit building on the entire block, warm yellow windows against a street so dark the surrounding buildings had ceased to exist. I pulled in too fast, overcorrected, ended up parked at an angle near the far end of the lot away from the entrance, and I sat there for a full 30 seconds before I could make myself get out. The box was on the passenger seat, still beeping, still yellow. I picked it up with both hands, cradled it like something fragile and terrible at the same time, and walked through the cold toward the glass door. The deputy behind the front desk was young, mid-20s, the kind of young that still shows in the jaw and in the eyes, not yet worn down by the particular weight this job puts on a person over time. He had a paper cup of coffee near his elbow that had clearly been cold for a while, and he was losing a private battle against the 3 a.m. pull that comes for everyone working overnight. He startled when the door swung open. I walked to the counter and set the box down in front of him. My hands were shaking badly enough that the metal made a sound against the laminate surface. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I pointed at the box and then at the blinking yellow light, and I managed something like a breath. Deputy Finch. His nameplate said Finch, and later I would learn he was 26 years old and 11 months into his first posting, leaned forward instinctively, one hand starting to reach. Deputy Finch. The voice came from the back hallway, low even and carrying the specific authority of someone who had never needed to raise it to be heard. Do not touch that. Captain Donovan was 58 years old and built like a man who had simply decided sometime in his 40s that he was done being surprised by anything. He came around the corner in a flannel shirt and worn duty pants, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the moment his eyes landed on the box, on the yellow light, on the rhythm of the beeping, something behind them went very quiet and very focused. He told Finch to step back from the counter. He got on his radio. I didn't catch all of it. Something about an EOD response, the address priority level spoken in the flat, deliberate cadence of a man reporting a weather event he's seen before and knows how to handle. Then he came around the counter, pulled a chair away from the wall, and sat down directly across from me. "I'm Captain Donovan," he said. "You're safe right now. I need you to talk to me." He asked short questions. I gave short answers. Where had I come from? Where had I been going? Who packed the bag? Where was my car? When I said my husband packed it, when I said the name Garrison, Donovan stopped. He walked to the nearest terminal, typed, and waited. The screen reflected in his reading glasses. I watched his expression. It didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. He picked up the desk phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. I heard the name he asked for, Special Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI Field Office, Nashville, and I heard what he said when she picked up my husband's name, the device, my car outside, and then a pause while she spoke. His response was 3 words, "Yes, ma'am, copy." He hung up and looked at me. "She'll be here in 90 minutes, he said. "Nobody leaves." I didn't ask who she was. I didn't have the capacity for additional questions right then. The EOD unit. The Explosive Ordnance Disposal Team, The specialist trained to handle bombs and devices that no one else touches arrived 22 minutes later in a dark van with no markings. 2 technicians in protective gear and a remote-controlled robot the size of a large cooler. They asked me where my car was. I pointed to the far end of the lot and they went to work. I watched through the glass door from inside, standing next to Finch, who didn't say anything, but also didn't leave, which I was quietly grateful for. The robot moved under the chassis. Stopped. Its camera arm adjusted. Stopped again. 8 minutes later, one of the technicians came back inside and said something quietly to Donovan. Donovan nodded once the way you nod when someone confirms something you already suspected. He came to sit across from me again. Mrs. Serena. He said, "The device in the bag was a remote trigger. It sends a signal to a secondary device. The secondary device was attached to the underside of your driver's seat. It's constructed from industrial-grade materials, the kind used in demolition and construction work." He paused, then continued, "The trigger is programmed to activate after the car maintains a speed above 60 miles per hour for approximately 15 continuous minutes. Highway speed, long enough to be clear of any residential area." The room was very quiet. "Garrison is a senior architect," I said. The words came out flat and strange, like I was identifying something in a photograph. Donovan didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he said, "Mrs. Serena, in the past year, have you had any accidents, any injuries at home?" I looked at him. "The staircase," I said. "In March. I fell. They said it was an accident." He held my gaze for one steady moment. Then he picked up his radio again and made a second call, a request to pull neighborhood security camera footage from Caldwell Ridge Road, specifically from 8 months ago, a camera belonging to a neighbor across the street. Footage that, as it turned out, had been saved to a cloud backup that its owner had never thought to check. It took 11 minutes to pull. Donovan watched the footage on his terminal. He didn't let me see it. When it was done, he closed the window, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years seeing the worst of what people do to each other and has never once gotten used to it. "Mrs. Serena," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter than before. This wasn't the first time he tried. The words hit my chest like something physical. I felt them land. I felt the weight of what they meant spreading through me like cold water, slow and thorough, reaching places I hadn't known to brace. 8 months. I had lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, eaten dinner, across the same table from a man who had already tried to end my life for 8 months. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. The glass door opened behind me, a rush of cold air. Footsteps measured, purposeful, and then a voice, a woman's clear and unhurried. "Captain Donovan." A brief pause. "Mrs. Serena." I turned. Special Agent Patricia Walsh was 44 years old, dark-haired, in a charcoal field jacket with her badge clipped at the waist. She was carrying a manila folder nearly 2 inches thick, and she set it on the counter beside Donovan's terminal without ceremony. The way someone sets down something they've been carrying for a long time and are finally ready to open. She looked at me. Her expression wasn't soft exactly, but it was steady in a way that I needed right then more than softness. "I think," she said, "we have a lot to talk about." The folder hit the table with a sound that was heavier than paper should make. Not a thud, exactly more like the specific weight of months of work landing somewhere solid the way a verdict sounds when it's read aloud in an empty room. Special Agent Patricia Walsh sat down across from me and Donovan without ceremony, without small talk, and without the particular brand of careful sympathy that people use when they're about to deliver news they think might break you. She looked like a woman who had long since made peace with the fact that the truth delivered cleanly does less damage than the truth withheld. 6 months ago, she said, a business partner filed a complaint against your husband for federal construction contract fraud. 3 states involved 1 federal project. That's when my office opened the file. She turned the folder toward me. I saw Garrison's name on the tab. Printed, labeled, filed. We've had eyes on his financials since then. We knew the debt was substantial. We knew the direction things were moving. She paused. We just didn't have enough for a criminal charge. Until tonight. She opened her laptop and walked us through it the way someone walks you through a medical diagnosis. Factual, paced, not unkind, but not softened either. I sat with my hands in my lap and tried to hold every word still long enough to understand it. The debt was larger than I had imagined possible. More than $2 million spread across failed construction projects in Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina, compounded by private gambling losses run through accounts I had never heard of and would never have been able to find shell accounts layered transfers. The financial architecture of a man who had been building an escape hatch for years while standing in the kitchen asking if I'd eaten lunch. I thought about all the times I had asked about money and he had redirected me. All the times I had felt vaguely embarrassed for asking like I was overstepping into a part of our life that was his to manage. I had interpreted that closed door as protection. I understood now that it was concealment. Walsh clicked to the next document. 12 days ago, she said, Garrison took out a life insurance policy on you through Pinnacle Life and Trust. $8 million. Accidental death. Benefit double indemnity clause for motor vehicle fatalities. She let that sit for a moment. Standard review for a policy this size is 3 to 6 months. Your husband arranged to compress that timeline considerably with help from someone inside the company. We identified that contact 2 weeks ago. We've been building the case. Double indemnity. She explained it briefly the way the document required a clause in certain life insurance policies that doubles the payout if death occurs by specific means, most commonly accidents, motor vehicle accident, $8 million. Garrison had been precise about the method. I want you to call your mother, Donovan said. I looked at him, then I understood. I dialed Eleanor's number. It rang twice, and she picked up on the third groggy, warm, the slow and familiar voice of someone pulled out of ordinary sleep at an hour. She had no reason to be awake. Serena, honey, it's 5 a.m. Is everything all right? I couldn't speak for a moment. Something broke open in my chest, not loudly, not all at once, but the way something breaks when the pressure behind it has been building for hours, and suddenly there is nowhere left for it to go. Mom, I managed. You're okay. I'm fine. I was asleep. What on earth? Walsh reached across the table and took the phone from me gently. Told Eleanor that Serena was safe, that she was with law enforcement, that everything would be explained soon. Her voice was steady and calm. She hung up without giving Eleanor a chance to ask more questions. I sat there and breathed. This is a federal case now, Walsh said, when I had put myself back together enough to listen. Attempted murder in the first degree. Federal insurance fraud. Use of an improvised explosive device that alone carries a mandatory federal sentence. My office has jurisdiction. Captain Donovan stays involved as local liaison, and his department remains essential on the ground. But the investigation runs through Nashville. She said it without making it a negotiation. It wasn't. Then she leaned forward slightly. Here's what I'm proposing. Garrison believes you're driving toward Millfield right now. He has no reason to think anything went wrong. We use that window. She outlined it in clear sequential terms. Serena would not exist by sunrise. A controlled detonation at Blackstone Quarry, an abandoned rock quarry 12 miles north, would destroy the car. An unofficial tip to a local news outlet. Garrison would hear that his wife's vehicle had been found burned on Route 7, consistent with catastrophic mechanical failure. Then they would wait. A policy this size doesn't pay out in 24 hours. Walsh continued. He'll have to file a claim. He'll have to come to Pinnacle Life and Trust. And when he does, we'll be ready. She also told me what would happen before sunrise: an emergency search warrant, a legal authorization issued by a federal judge, allowing law enforcement to enter and search a property without prior notice when there is immediate risk of evidence destruction, would be filed with a duty judge in Nashville. Based on the physical device already recovered, the warrant would be granted within the hour. FBI technicians would enter the house on Caldwell Ridge Road and install cameras and listening equipment before Garrison woke up. Everything by the book, she said. Every step covered. She looked at me across the table. Donovan looked at me. The folder with Garrison's name on the tab sat between us. This is your choice, Mrs. Serena, not an obligation. If you say no, we protect you another way. But I want to be honest with you, his access to resources and his history of planning suggests he will try again. I looked at the folder. I thought about the staircase in March. I thought about Garrison's hands, dry and warm, holding mine in the hospital. I thought about 12 days ago when he had signed a document worth $8 million and put my name on it like a price tag. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. Walsh nodded once. She picked up her phone, and the language that came out of it was clipped and coded, and entirely beyond my comprehension. Call signs, case numbers, a sequence of instructions to people I would never meet. But I understood enough. The machine was running now. And somewhere across town, in a house on Caldwell Ridge Road, with a left side porch that still sagged, my husband was asleep in a locked room, dreaming about $8 million with no idea that the woman he thought he'd already killed was wide awake, watching the sky turn from black to gray through the window of a sheriff's office, and had just said yes. The quarry in early morning looks nothing like what it is. From the top of the access road, Blackstone Quarry appears almost peaceful. A wide limestone bowl sunk into the Tennessee hillside, its sheer walls pale gray in the pre-dawn light. A low mist sitting undisturbed across the bottom, like something that had been poured in and forgotten. The kind of place that might be beautiful if you had any capacity left to notice beauty. I didn't particularly. Not at 6:30 in the morning, standing on the access road with a paper cup of coffee I hadn't touched, watching the EOD team work under halogen lights 200 meters below me. My car was down there. The white Hyundai that Garrison had driven to the dealership without telling me, that he had parked in the driveway on a Saturday morning 14 months ago with a red bow across the hood, an actual red bow. The kind you see in car commercials, grinning at me while I stood on the porch in my socks, trying to understand what I was looking at. I remembered thinking that nobody did things like that in real life. I remembered thinking I had married someone extraordinary. I looked at it now under the halogen wash and understood that the bow, the grin, the whole careful production of it, that had been the beginning of something. Not generosity, not love, calculation. You don't insure something you want gone for $8 million without first making sure the person it belongs to feels secure in it. Walsh appeared beside me. She spoke without preamble. Judge Harmon signed the warrant at 5:42 this morning. My team entered the house on Caldwell Ridge at 6:15. Cameras are up. Audio is live. She paused. He's still asleep. The EOD team, the same unit that had been under my car at the substation parking lot 6 hours earlier, had removed the original device and secured it as evidence. What they placed in the vehicle now was their own controlled arrangement, an ignition source and accelerant positioned to produce a fire, consistent with a catastrophic fuel system failure, the kind of burn pattern a highway patrol officer would expect to see at the scene of a high-speed accident. Nothing military, nothing that would look like what it was. Tennessee Highway Patrol had been briefed by Walsh the previous hour. They would respond to the scene on Route 7 where the car would be reported and log it as a suspected accident under active investigation. No identity confirmed. No next of kin notified through official channels. The gap where a body should have been would be attributed to the severity of the fire and the ongoing nature of the investigation. It would hold long enough. I understood all of this because Walsh had explained it to me in the car on the way here, in the same measured tone she used for everything. The way a surgeon explains a procedure while you're already prepped and the time for second guessing has passed. Donovan was standing to my left. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was, I realized, exactly the right thing to do. The team cleared the quarry floor. One of the technicians climbed the far wall access road and raised a hand. Walsh keyed her radio, said 2 words. The sound arrived before the light did a deep concussive thud that I felt in my sternum before I heard it with my ears. and then the fireball came up from the quarry floor in a column that turned the low-hanging mist orange and gold, and the limestone walls caught the shockwave and threw it back on itself. And then there was just fire burning clean and total in the bottom of that bowl, and pieces of white metal scattered across the pale rock. I watched it. I didn't cry. I had expected to cry, and then I didn't. And I didn't know what that meant, except that something in me had already finished grieving this particular thing before the flame arrived to make it official. What I felt instead was something quieter and older and harder to name. The marriage had already been gone. I was just watching the funeral. By early afternoon, I was in a safe house, a nondescript 2-bedroom apartment in a building Walsh's office maintained in downtown Harlow Creek, the kind of place designed to look like nothing from the outside. Donovan had driven me. I had slept for 3 hours on a couch that smelled like someone else's laundry, and when I woke up, Walsh was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She had footage to show me, pulled from the restaurant's own security system, which the FBI had requested under the active federal warrant. "He moved fast," she said, and turned the screen slightly so I could see. The Meridian Grill at noon. Garrison and Sabrina at a corner table, close not quite touching the body language of two people who know each other in ways they don't advertise. The television above the bar was cycling through local news, and then the chyron changed and I watched Garrison see it. He stood up so quickly his chair caught the table leg. His water glass went over. He said something I couldn't hear it. The footage had no audio in the dining room, but the shape of it, the way his face moved. The hand that went to his forehead and then dropped it was devastation. Convincing complete the kind of grief that makes the people at the next table put down their forks. 3 of them did. One woman reached over and touched his arm. He was spectacular. Walsh closed the laptop. Wire surveillance picked up his messages as of 6:15 this morning when the warrant took effect, she said. He's been texting Sabrina since 9. Her responses stopped completely about 2 hours ago. She pulled up a transcript on her phone. The last exchange was Garrison writing, when they find the remains the claim goes through Alderton should be 48 hours. Then a read receipt on Sabrina's end. Then 3 dots appearing and disappearing for nearly 15 minutes. Then nothing. She didn't know, Walsh said. It wasn't a question. She thought it was a staged disappearance. Walsh continued. Insurance fraud, divorce play, Serena walks away. Garrison collects. Sabrina gets the life she was promised. The word remains appears to have clarified the situation for her considerably. I sat with that for a moment. The woman who had been sleeping with my husband for however long it had been, who had sat across from him at that restaurant while I burned in a quarry, had just discovered that she had signed onto a murder plan without knowing it was a murder plan. I didn't know exactly what to feel about that. I filed it away. Walsh looked at me. Your husband has called your phone 3 times today. She held up a handset, my old phone SIM still active, running through a relay so the location signal still showed Route 7. Garrison's name was on the screen. The call was going to voicemail. Again, I looked at it. Thought about what it meant that he was performing concern at a restaurant and also calling his dead wife's phone. Building the record. Papering over the evidence with grief, one missed call at a time. I felt nothing about him except a cold and clarifying absence of the doubt I had been carrying for years. Let it go, I said. The apartment had no name on the mailbox, no welcome mat, no potted plant by the door, no scuff marks on the threshold from years of people coming and going. The hallway outside smelled like industrial cleaning solution, and nothing else the smell of a space maintained rather than lived in. I had been here since Friday afternoon, and I had not gone outside once. Room 312 of a building whose name I had been asked not to write down anywhere was exactly what Walsh had called it when she brought me here functional. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen without personality, a living area that had been rearranged to accommodate a folding table holding 3 monitors and a secure laptop. The windows faced the building's interior courtyard, not the street. You could not see this apartment from the road. Nobody driving past would think to look up. For the first time since 2:17 Saturday morning, since the phone went off and everything became something else, I felt the specific relief of being invisible. The monitors had been running since before sunrise Saturday. Walsh's team had entered the house on Caldwell Ridge Road at 6:15 that morning, warrant in hand. And by the time Garrison stirred in the bedroom down the hall, every room was already covered. Judge Harmon's search warrant had given Walsh's team authority to enter the house on Caldwell Ridge Road before sunrise, and they had used every minute of that window. By the time Garrison woke up on Friday, there were 9 cameras active in his home living room, kitchen hallway, home office, the staircase landing. The garage, each feeding to a secure FBI relay, each recorded and time-stamped. Walsh had offered to let me watch. She had been direct about why. "You know how he moves in that house better than any agent on my team," she'd said. "You'll see something off before we will." So I watched. It was the strangest thing I had ever done, stranger than standing at the edge of a quarry watching my car become fire, stranger than hearing a federal agent tell me my husband had tried to kill me twice. Sitting in a dim room on a Saturday afternoon watching a man I had shared a bed with for 4 years move through the kitchen we had picked tile for together, pour coffee from the machine I had bought on sale at Target 2 Christmases ago, and lean against the counter with the particular posture of someone who has exhaled after holding their breath for a very long time. He looked lighter. That was the word that came to me, and I sat with the wrongness of it. He looked the way people look when something they've been dreading is finally over. He looked the way I had looked once when a difficult client finally signed off on a project I'd been revising for 3 weeks. At one point, his phone lit up on the counter. He glanced at it and he smiled. Not a performance. Not the careful, composed expression he wore in public. Something smaller and more private, the way you smile at something that's going exactly the way you hoped. I looked away from that monitor, then I made myself look back. Walsh came in at 3 in the afternoon with 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside me at the table. "Financial forensics came back an hour ago," she said. "He's been moving money out of your joint accounts for approximately 24 months. Small amounts, varied intervals, never enough in a single transfer to trigger automatic flagging. Total just over $300,000 distributed across accounts in his name, only 2 of which we traced to holding entities in Delaware." Delaware, she explained it without being asked the way she explained most things, a state where business entities can be registered with minimal disclosure requirements, commonly used for legitimate purposes, but also frequently exploited to obscure asset ownership. $300,000, 2 years. The span of our last 2 anniversaries, our last 2 Thanksgivings, the last 2 times he had asked how my work was going with exactly the right amount of warmth. "There's more," Walsh said. She turned her laptop toward me. The name on the screen was Alderton Mr. Gerald Alderton, Director of Claims Processing at Pinnacle Life and Trust, 41 years old, 11 years with the company. Clean employment record until approximately 7 months ago, when the pattern of his decisions began to show a specific and recurring anomaly. Life insurance claims involving certain policyholders, processed at a speed inconsistent with company protocol, with verification steps documented as complete when the underlying paperwork indicated otherwise. "Your policy was flagged internally by a junior analyst 3 weeks ago," Walsh said. She reported it up the chain. It landed on Alderton's desk and stopped moving. She let that sit. Garrison approached him through an architectural industry contact. They had lunch twice in the 6 months before your policy was filed. We have him on camera at a restaurant in Franklin. Payments were in cash, which he likely believed was untraceable. The cash was not untraceable. We've had eyes on Alderton since the 2nd week of my investigation. I remembered Garrison mentioning a friend in finance, once someone he'd run into at a conference, someone who knew how the insurance side of construction contracts worked. I hadn't asked for a name. I hadn't thought to. "He doesn't know you're watching him," I said. "He knows we exist," Walsh said. "He doesn't know how much we have," which means he's still doing exactly what Garrison needs him to do, and we're going to let him keep doing it. Right up until the moment Garrison walks into Pinnacle Life and Trust to file a claim, and Alderton processes it under our supervision. Every step documented, every communication recorded. She unfolded a printed diagram and spread it across the table between us, a financial network map, the kind that looks like something between a spider web and an org chart. Boxes connected by lines, names I didn't recognize. Account numbers, partially redacted arrows showing the direction money had moved across what appeared to be 4 states. He didn't build this in a few weeks, Serena Walsh said. This is at least 14 months of preparation. I looked at the diagram. I thought about 14 months ago, where we had been, what we had done on weekends, whether I had been happy. I thought I had been. On the center monitor, I watched Garrison set his coffee mug in the sink and walk into the living room. He stood in the middle of it for a moment, not doing anything, not reaching for his phone, just standing there looking up at the ceiling with an expression I couldn't read from the camera angle. Something interior and calculating the face of a man working through a sequence of steps in his head. Then he moved to the bedroom. The door closed. The light under the door went out. It was 3:40 in the afternoon. Walsh saw it too. She leaned forward slightly, eyes on the monitor. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "That's new," she said quietly. It was. In 4 years, Garrison had never gone to bed in the middle of the afternoon. He didn't nap. He didn't retreat. He processed standing up in motion with a phone in his hand. Whatever was happening behind that closed door was not sleep. Walsh reached for her radio. When Garrison turned that bedroom light off at 3:40 in the afternoon, Walsh did not wait to find out why. The audio feed answered within 4 minutes. He was on the phone, a number that traced to a prepaid device registered to a freight logistics company in Memphis that had been dissolved 8 months ago. The call lasted 11 minutes. Walsh's team caught enough a location referenced as the Mercer account, a date Tuesday, and the phrase "move the schedule" repeated twice in the flat. Careful tone of a man issuing instructions he expects to be followed without discussion. That was when Walsh started building what she called Plan B contingency, and that was the last peaceful afternoon any of us had. Walsh had been awake for 36 hours by the time she sat down beside me at the monitor table and began explaining what her team was about to do. She didn't look it. She had the particular alertness of someone whose body had long ago made a separate arrangement with exhaustion, one that didn't involve sleep so much as a kind of continuous, low-burning focus that could sustain itself indefinitely when the work required it. She set her coffee down, opened a folder, and spoke with the same measured precision she used for everything. What I'm about to describe falls entirely within the scope of the search warrant Judge Harmon signed, she said first. I want you to understand that before I explain the specifics. Everything my team does in that house tonight is authorized, documented, and admissible. I nodded. Good. She turned a page. Now, here's what we're going to do to your husband. The warrant Walsh had obtained was drafted broadly enough intentionally to authorize what federal investigators call covert entry operations, the right to enter a premises undetected, collect evidence and conduct investigative activities while the subject is absent without notifying the subject. The listening equipment already installed fell under a companion court order issued simultaneously with the main warrant authorized under the federal wiretap statute. Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control Act, which permits audio surveillance when a federal judge finds probable cause that a serious crime is being committed or planned. What Walsh proposed tonight was something her team had used before in cases involving suspects who were still operating freely, not yet arrested, not yet aware of the full scope of what was closing in on them. The technical term was psychological pressure operation. The working description was simpler than that. She was going to make Garrison's house feel haunted. He left at 5:40 in the evening. I watched him on the hallway, camera jacket on, keys in hand, the relaxed stride of a man who considered his home safe. He drove away. Walsh keyed her radio. Her team was inside in under 4 minutes and out in 12. I watched on the cameras as 2 agents in plain clothes moved through the house with the efficiency of people who had done this before. In the master bathroom, one of them produced a small atomizer the perfume Walsh's team had identified from receipts and photographs recovered during the search and applied 3 quick sprays near the towel rack and the UNC vanity mirror, not enough to be immediately visible, enough to be there when someone walked in and breathed. The second agent worked in the kitchen attaching a small Bluetooth audio device behind the cabinet above the refrigerator, a supplemental listening and playback unit, also covered under the companion court order. It could receive a signal from Walsh's laptop and push audio through the house's existing wireless speaker system, which Garrison had installed 2 years ago and which Walsh's technical team had already mapped. The third item was placed last and carefully. A device identical in appearance to the trigger unit recovered from my travel bag but fully inert, rendered non-functional by EOD before it ever left federal custody, was positioned beneath Garrison's pillow on the left side of the bed, the side he slept on. Resting on top of it was a small folded piece of paper. FBI document forensics had pulled samples of my handwriting from papers recovered during the house search, grocery lists, a birthday card tucked in a kitchen drawer, margin notes on an old photography invoice. The note on the pillow had been composed using those samples. It read in my handwriting, "You forgot to turn this off. Didn't want you to waste the battery. Serena." I sat in the dim light of the safe house and read that sentence on Walsh's screen and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with fear. It was the recognition that I was watching professionals. Garrison came home at 7:12. He went to the bathroom first, the way he always did after being out. I watched him push the door open, reach for the light, and stop. He stood completely still in the doorway for 4 seconds. I watched him breathe. He turned his head slightly the way an animal does when it catches something on the air that its brain hasn't yet classified. Then his hands started moving, opening the cabinet under the sink, pulling back the shower curtain, checking behind the door. His movements accelerated as the search came up empty. He found a can of disinfectant spray under the cabinet and used most of it, filling the bathroom with a chemical fog, his jaw tight and his breathing audible even through the camera's small speaker. He stood in the middle of that chemical fog and looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. At 9:15, the kitchen speaker came on. The playlist that filled the house was mine, the worship music I played every morning before a shoot. The same familiar voices and chord progressions I had used to make the dark feel smaller on Route 7 2 nights ago. It came through the kitchen. Speaker at medium volume, unhurried and clear. Garrison was out of the bedroom in seconds. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, ripped the speaker from the wall mount, the main unit, not the concealed device, and threw it against the floor hard enough that pieces skidded under the refrigerator. He stood over the wreckage and breathed, looked at the ceiling, looked at the walls. He was a man trying to locate the source of something that had no source he could find. He found the pillow note at 11. The sound he made was not a word. He read the note twice and then he called Sabrina, and what came out of him in that phone call was not grief and not guilt. It was accusation, escalating to a threat that made Walsh reach forward and turn up the audio feed. Garrison's voice was jagged in a way I had never heard from him in 4 years of marriage, stripped of the composure that had always been his most reliable armor. Through the phone, Sabrina's voice was groggy and genuinely frightened, not performing, not strategic, frightened. Walsh noted something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. At 11:40, Garrison sat down at his desk. He pulled open the bottom drawer, retrieved a key I had never seen, and opened the small steel safe built into the wall behind the bookcase, a feature of the house I had not known existed, which explained in retrospect a number of things I had attributed to other causes. Walsh zoomed the relevant camera feed to maximum resolution. He removed a folder, signed a document inside it, and returned it to the safe. The action took less than 90 seconds. His hands were steady. Whatever else was unraveling in him tonight, this part, the administrative part, the part that involved papers and signatures and future plans, that part of Garrison still functioned with precision. Walsh's financial analyst had already flagged the document earlier that day, having traced it through Alderton's processed files at Pinnacle Life and Trust a second life insurance policy. $3 million beneficiary listed as Sabrina. The signature authorizing the policy on Sabrina's behalf, her consent signature, the one that should have been signed in person with identification verified, had been executed by Alderton using a forged copy of her handwriting processed internally without standard verification. In the same manner he had handled mine. Garrison had not told Sabrina this policy existed. Garrison had not told Sabrina she had signed anything. I looked at Sabrina's name on the document Walsh had pulled up beside the camera feed, and I thought about the woman sitting in whatever apartment she was in tonight, frightened by a phone call from a man she thought she knew, and I understood something I had not expected to understand. She was already in the sequence. She just didn't know her position in it yet. Garrison fell asleep sometime after 1 a.m. On the camera, his face was pale and damp, his breathing the shallow, restless rhythm of someone whose sleep is not rest. Walsh killed the bedroom monitor and turned to me. "We need to accelerate the timeline," she said. "He's more unstable than our behavioral assessment projected. Unstable subjects take shortcuts. They make contact with associates they shouldn't. They move money without proper cover." She paused. "They make mistakes, but they also make decisions that can hurt people before we're in position to stop them." I waited. "We move on Pinnacle Life and Trust on Monday," she said. 48 hours. The coffee was already made when I came out of the bedroom that Sunday morning. Walsh was sitting at the folding table, both hands around her mug, watching the door the way people do when they have news they've been carrying for a few hours and are ready to set down. The monitors behind her were dark except for one, the hallway camera at Caldwell Ridge Road Garrison's silhouette, moving past at the far edge of the frame. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. "She called us," Walsh said. She didn't specify who. She didn't need to. There was only one person in this story who occupied the precise position of knowing too much and trusting too little, frightened enough to move smart enough to try to move carefully. Sabrina had called the FBI Nashville field office tip line at 2:14 in the morning from a prepaid phone purchased with cash. Walsh's duty agent had flagged it immediately and patched it up the chain. By 2:40, Walsh had been on the line herself. "She's not stupid," Walsh said. The burner phone, the tip line instead of 911. The way she structured what she told us, she was trying to give us enough to take her seriously without giving us enough to use against her before she had a deal in hand. A brief pause. She didn't quite manage that, but the instinct was sound. What Sabrina had offered was substantial, a thread of text messages between her and Garrison spanning 4 months. 3 emails sent through an encrypted platform that her FBI contact had since worked with their technical division to retrieve in plain text. And a single audio file, a recording she had made herself on her own phone of a conversation with Garrison, in which he referenced in specific enough terms to matter, something he called the project and the timeline. Tennessee Walsh reminded me is a one-party consent state. That means any person who is part of a conversation can legally record it without telling the other party. Sabrina had been part of that conversation. The recording was clean legal. And Walsh said this with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been building a case for 6 months, potentially the clearest direct evidence of criminal intent they had. "She wants a deal," I said. "Everyone wants a deal," Walsh said. "That's how this works." She explained it the way she explained most things without softening it unnecessarily. A cooperation agreement wasn't a pardon. Sabrina had participated in a federal conspiracy that resulted in an attempted murder. She would stand before a judge. What cooperation could affect was the recommendation the U.S. Attorney's Office made at sentencing the difference between the high end and the low end of a guideline range that Walsh said, without elaborating further, carried significant years. The formal agreement would be negotiated through federal prosecutors, not Walsh's office directly. But Walsh's recommendation carried weight, and Sabrina understood that. "What made her run?" I asked. Walsh turned her mug in her hands. "She found the policy." I nodded slowly. The $3 million life insurance policy that Alderton had processed using a forged version of Sabrina's signature, the one she had never been shown, never consented to, never knew existed until apparently she had gone looking for something else and found it instead. "She thought she was the architect," Walsh said. "She thought she was standing beside the plan, not inside it." Walsh outlined what came next with the same economical precision she used for everything else. Sabrina had signed a preliminary cooperation agreement by phone pending formal documentation. She did not know Serena was alive. She would not be told. Walsh was direct about why operational security. If Sabrina knew the information existed in her mind, and a frightened person in a high-pressure situation sitting across a restaurant table from Garrison was not a reliable container for information that critical, the risk was not worth taking, regardless of intent. Sabrina would proceed as planned. She would accompany Garrison to Pinnacle Life and Trust on Tuesday, as he had arranged. Donovan had confirmed the appointment that morning. Alderton reporting in under FBI supervision per his own cooperation terms. She would play her role. She would not know that every exit from that building would already be covered. She thinks she's managing the situation, Walsh said. She's walking into a position we've already mapped. Donovan, who had been standing near the window with his coffee since I sat down, spoke without turning around. Garrison confirmed the appointment himself, Tuesday 10:30. Alderton's ready. I looked at the single-lit monitor. Garrison's hallway empty now, the light from the kitchen casting a long rectangle across the hardwood floor. Is she going to prison? I asked Walsh. Walsh met my eyes. Yes, the degree and the duration are what cooperation affects. She said it without cruelty, but also without comfort. She made choices that put you in a car on Route 7 with a device under your seat. The law doesn't subtract that because she got scared. I sat with that. There was a version of me probably that should have felt something more complicated about Sabrina's situation. I tried to locate it. I found I couldn't access it clearly enough to name it. What do you need me to do? I asked instead. Walsh looked at me steadily. There's a moment Tuesday when Garrison will see you, and we need him to react in a way that is unambiguous on camera and on audio, something that locks the door on reasonable doubt, something a defense attorney cannot reframe. She paused. We've built the case, but you're the element that breaks him open. What if he doesn't break? Walsh was quiet long enough that I noticed the silence. Then you'll have to be the one who breaks him, she said. You know him better than any of us do. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night for a long time. I said the sentence I would have to say to Garrison's face in 48 hours. I said it quietly at first, then at normal volume, then again. I watched my mouth in the mirror and waited for the tremor in my voice to stop. It took 23 tries. When it finally came out clean and level, I turned off the light and went to bed. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the dark and ran the sequence forward in my mind, the lobby, the elevator, the moment until the sequence blurred, and I lost the thread of it somewhere around midnight. That was when the phone on the nightstand vibrated. The FBI-issued handset, Walsh's number on the screen. A single line of text. We have a problem. Before I reveal what Garrison was really planning to do on Tuesday night, and trust me, this is the part nobody saw coming, comment the number 10 below so I know you're still with me. Because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything we thought we knew about this man and how far he was willing to go. A heads up, the story ahead contains some fictional elements. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that's not the kind of content you're here for, it's completely okay to step away now. But if you're staying, buckle up. The hallway light was on when I pushed open the door to the small room Walsh had claimed as a workspace. 3 laptops, 3 screens, cables running along the baseboard to a portable router that one of her agents had installed on the first day. Coffee going cold in a mug she hadn't touched in what looked like a while. Walsh herself sitting forward with her elbows on the table, watching the center screen with the particular stillness of someone who has already processed the bad news and moved directly into solving it. On the center screen, Garrison on his living room sofa, 11 o'clock at night in his house on Caldwell Ridge Road, not asleep, not watching television, sitting with his phone in both hands and looking at it the way a chess player looks at a board when they've decided to sacrifice a piece and are waiting for the right moment. I sat down in the chair beside Walsh. Talk to me, I said. At 10 o'clock that evening, Garrison had placed a call to a landline in Nashville. The number belonged to a law firm, a 3-attorney operation in a building off Charlotte Avenue that FBI Financial Crimes had been monitoring for 11 months. Not because of their clients, because of the attorneys themselves, 2 of whom were subjects in an active money laundering investigation. Under the crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege, the legal principle that protection does not extend to communications made in furtherance of a crime the office had been under. Court-authorized audio surveillance since the previous spring. Garrison's call lasted 40 seconds. Walsh played me the audio without preamble. I heard my husband's voice clipped, controlled the tone he used when he was issuing instructions. He expected to be followed, say 8 words that Walsh's team had spent 2 hours unpacking. Activate Plan B, Tuesday night. Mercer travels alone. She stopped the playback. Daniel Mercer, she said, and turned one of the side laptops toward me. The FBI's Financial Forensics Unit had been building the profile for 6 months, tracking the thread of it through shell accounts and wire transfers that originated in Garrison's name and arrived. Several institutional hops later in places that required neither transparency nor explanation. What the profile showed now laid out across Walsh's screen in the flat language of federal investigation was a structure that had been assembled not in desperation, but in deliberate, patient sequence. 8 months ago, an offshore account established in the Cayman Islands under an entity called Mercer Capital Holdings, funded through a series of transfers that had been routed carefully enough to delay detection. Current balance sufficient, Walsh's analyst had noted in dry understatement for an extended relocation. 4 months ago, a fraudulent passport issued in the name of Daniel Mercer, date of birth, offset from Garrison's by 2 years photograph current. The document had been produced through a network that Walsh's team had encountered before in 2 prior federal cases and had been attempting to trace to its origin for longer than she seemed willing to specify. 48 hours from now, a one-way flight departing Nashville International at 11:17 in the evening, booked under the Mercer name, destination Mexico City. Connecting onward to a city Walsh did not name but noted had no active extradition agreement for financial crimes. 6 hours after his appointment at Pinnacle Life and Trust, I sat back in my chair and thought about that particular sequence. The appointment in the morning, the flight at night, the account waiting with enough money to disappear into for years. The insurance claim, the $8 million that had put a device under my seat on Route 7, was never meant to be the destination. It was a door he intended to leave open behind him, a document signed and filed that could serve if anyone came looking, as evidence that he had behaved like a grieving husband trying to settle his late wife's estate. He moved the money years ago, I said. The bulk of it, yes. The insurance payout would have followed eventually once the claim processed. But he wasn't waiting for it. He was already done. Walsh was already done explaining by the time she said it. She had the flat efficiency of someone who has shifted entirely out of analysis and into action. The airport notifications went out within 30 minutes of Walsh making 2 calls TSA and the Homeland Security Operations Center. Both Garrison Hale and the Mercer alias were flagged across Nashville International and Memphis. The process was not a shutdown or a public alert. It was a quiet administrative update to a list that gate agents check without fanfare, executed at the federal level in the kind of time frame that only exists when the right authorizations are already in place. Walsh had filed the supporting documentation before she messaged me. Alderton received his instructions at 12:40 in the morning. He was to contact Garrison at 9 o'clock Tuesday, confirm the Pinnacle appointment under the guise of scheduling it before an upcoming absence, and express mild urgency without triggering suspicion. Walsh dictated the language. Alderton, who had been operating under FBI supervision for weeks and whose cooperation agreement left him very little latitude for improvisation, wrote it down and read it back. "He'll show," Walsh said. "The appointment is part of his own plan. He needs it on record. He'll be there." I looked at the bedroom camera on the right screen. Garrison was in the closet. He had pulled down a carry-on bag, charcoal gray compact, the kind designed for a person who has learned to travel light, and was placing items into it with methodical care. A folded shirt, a second, a small leather travel case. He was not packing for a weekend. He was packing for someone who knows the difference between what is necessary and what can be replaced. I had bought him that travel case for his birthday 2 years ago. I had ordered it from a shop in Nashville and had it monogrammed with his initials because I thought it was the kind of thing that showed you paid attention to a person. He folded a pair of dark trousers and laid them across the top of the bag and smoothed them flat with both hands. I watched him do this and understood with a clarity that had nothing left of shock in it what it meant. If tomorrow failed, if the timing slipped, if something in the chain broke before it closed, the man standing in that bedroom would walk out of that house on Tuesday evening as Daniel Mercer. He would board a flight. He would land somewhere without an extradition agreement. And Serena Hale would remain exactly what she was on every official record that existed right now, a woman whose car burned on Route 7, case open, subject unknown. No courtroom, no sentence. No one standing across from him and making him account for any of it. Walsh closed the bedroom screen when he turned off the closet light. She looked at me. "Get some sleep if you can," she said. "Tomorrow you're going to walk into a room with your husband and he's going to think you're a ghost." I nodded. She didn't add anything to that. She turned back to her screens, and I went back down the hallway to the room I had been sleeping in, and I lay down on top of the covers with my shoes still on and looked at the ceiling. I did not sleep. I counted the hours instead the way you count things when numbers are the only solid surface available, and waited for Tuesday to arrive. Walsh had been there since 6. I could tell by the coffee, 2 empty cups already in the sink, a third going cold beside the laptop, and by the way, the diagram on the kitchen table had been annotated in at least 3 different ink colors, which meant she had been working through it in stages, adding layers as the confirmations came in overnight. Pinnacle Life and Trust, 12 stories, corner building. The floor plan of the 12th floor spread across the table in 2 sheets taped together at the center, every room labeled in Walsh's precise small handwriting. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. "Sabrina signed at 4:30 this morning," Walsh said without looking up from her laptop. Her attorney was present. The cooperation agreement was reviewed and approved by the duty prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Tennessee before she put pen to it. "It's clean." I poured coffee and sat down. Walsh had met with Sabrina in person at a secondary location, a conference room in a federal building in Nashville, cameras off per the terms negotiated by Sabrina's attorney. The agreement was specific. Sabrina would arrive at Pinnacle Life and Trust on Tuesday morning with Garrison as planned, behaving in every observable way as she had been expected to behave. No deviation, no signal, no communication with Garrison before or during that would suggest anything had changed. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney's Office would submit a cooperation memo to the sentencing judge at the appropriate time, detailing the nature and extent of her assistance. The memo would not guarantee an outcome. It would influence one. "She asked one question," Walsh said. "She asked if Serena was actually dead." I looked at her. I told her the investigation was ongoing and that I wasn't in a position to discuss the status of the victim. Walsh turned a page. She accepted that. She's smart enough to understand what it means and smart enough not to push. She walked me through the Pinnacle floor plan the way a pilot walks through a pre-flight checklist, not quickly, not with impatience, but with the deliberate attention of someone who understands that the details they're covering now are the ones that prevent a different kind of conversation later. 12th floor. The conference room Alderton used for significant claim meetings, a corner room glass on 2 sides, looking out over the Nashville skyline. A private entrance off the main corridor and a secondary door at the rear used by building staff. On the other side of the rear wall, a narrow observation room accessible only through a maintenance corridor equipped with a one-way panel that looked directly into the conference space. Walsh pointed to each position on the diagram as she named it. 2 agents at the building entrance plain clothes, 1 in the elevator lobby on 12. 2 in the observation room, one of them a recording technician. Donovan coordinating communication from a vehicle on the street below. Alderton would be seated at the table when Garrison arrived. Sabrina would accompany Garrison. The meeting would proceed according to the script. Alderton had been given routine claim review paperwork for the file Everything Normal. Walsh would give Serena the signal when the time came, not before. "When I say go," Walsh said, "you come through the main corridor door. You stop at the threshold. You don't advance into the room. You say what you've practiced, and then you let us take it from there." I nodded. "Say it back to me." I said it back to her. She listened, nodded once, and moved on. Donovan arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He came through the door the way he always did, quietly, without announcement, but this time, there was someone behind him. A woman in her early 60s, compact and careful in the way of someone navigating unfamiliar territory without wanting to show it. Gray coat, hands holding the strap of her purse with the particular grip of a person who has been told something large is happening and is still finding their footing inside it. Eleanor Voss. My mother. She saw me and stopped. I had not planned what to do in that moment. There wasn't a plan for it. I was across the room in a few steps, and then her arms were around me, and she was smaller than I remembered, and holding on with more force than I expected. And neither of us said anything for a while. When we sat down, Donovan took the chair near the window and began explaining. He covered the events, in order: the device on Route 7, the warrant, the investigation, the insurance policy. Eleanor listened with her hands in her lap and her face very still, the expression of a person filing information carefully because they don't yet trust themselves to react to it. When Donovan reached the staircase, marched the fall, the camera footage from the neighbor across the street, Eleanor went quiet in a different way. Not processing. Something older than that. She looked at me. "I knew something was wrong," she said. I should have said something. "You had no proof," I said. "Only a feeling." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and took out her phone. She turned the screen toward me. I had this, though. I never knew what to do with it. 6 months ago, I had sent Eleanor a photograph from my phone. It was the kind of thing you send a parent to make them laugh. The garage caught mid-chaos. Garrison's architectural samples and equipment stacked in overlapping disorder along the back wall. I had captioned it something about living with a very organized man. Eleanor had saved it. In the lower right corner of the image, behind a tower of rolled blueprints, a row of dark blue industrial containers were visible. Uniform shape. A logo printed on the side in white. Walsh was on the phone before Eleanor had finished explaining. The EOD unit's lead technician confirmed the match in 11 minutes. Same manufacturer, same product line. Same batch code visible on the container in the photograph as on the remnants recovered from the device under my car. The containers in my garage photograph had been present at least 6 months before the device was assembled and planted. Premeditation. Not impulse, not desperation. A plan that had been resourced and staged over months while I moved through the house and edited wedding photographs and thought I was living a life. Walsh set down her phone and made a note on the legal pad. The word she wrote was underlined twice. We ate dinner at the folding table, all 4 of us, from containers Donovan had brought from a diner 2 miles away. Nobody talked much. Walsh was on her laptop. Donovan ate methodically. Eleanor sat close enough to me that our elbows touched, and I let that be. After Walsh and Donovan moved back to the workspace, Eleanor and I stayed at the table. The room was quiet. Outside the covered window, whatever light there had been was gone. She put her hand over mine on the table. Her palm was warm and dry, the same hand that had reached for mine in the dark when I was small and afraid of things I couldn't name. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "you already won. You're still here." I looked at her hand on top of mine. I thought about Route 7, about the quarry, about a car with a red bow that had been a piece of a plan I had mistaken for love. "I know," I said. I meant it. At 9 o'clock, I went to the back room and lay down on the narrow bed. 12 hours. The number was clean and countable. I closed my eyes and let it settle. For the first time in 4 days, sleep came without a fight. Deep and dark and dreamless, the kind of rest that only arrives when the body finally accepts that there is nothing left to do tonight. Tomorrow was already decided. I only had to show up. I was up before the alarm, 5:47 according to the clock on the nightstand. The room was still dark, the building outside quiet in the particular way of a Tuesday morning that doesn't yet know what it is. I lay there for a few minutes and let the day arrive at its own pace, and then I got up and went to the bathroom and began getting ready. I had laid the beige coat out the night before. It was hanging on the back of the door when I came in. The one Garrison had bought me 2 springs ago, handing it over in its tissue paper like a small ceremony, saying the color suited me in a way that made me feel seen. He had a gift for that, making you feel seen. I understood now that seeing people clearly was a skill he had developed for specific purposes, not general ones. I put it on anyway, not for him. I put it on because it fit well and because I wanted to look like a woman who was not afraid, and because sometimes the right armor is the thing that was originally handed to you as a leash. Walsh was in the kitchen when I came out. Eleanor was already seated at the table, both hands around a mug, dressed and composed in the careful way of someone who has decided to hold themselves together through sheer discipline. She looked up when she saw me. She didn't say anything. She reached out and adjusted the collar of my coat slightly the way mothers do, and then put her hands back around the mug. I sat down and ate. Toast and half a cup of coffee because Walsh had said, "Eat something," and I had learned in the past 4 days that Walsh's instructions tended to be correct. Through the earpiece, Walsh was already running confirmations the low, abbreviated back and forth of a team that had rehearsed this enough times that the words had been compressed to almost nothing. She moved through each position with the unhurried precision of someone checking instruments before a flight entrance. Agents confirmed elevator lobby, confirmed observation room, ready. Recording equipment live Alderton in place and steady. She looked at me across the table when she finished. "We're green across the board." I nodded. On the center laptop, the Caldwell Ridge Road camera was still running. Out of habit or something I didn't want to call by a more accurate name, I looked at it. Garrison was in the master bedroom. Dark vest, charcoal trousers, the navy tie he wore to presentations. He was standing at the mirror above the dresser, adjusting the knot with the particular attention of a man who cares about the impression he makes before he walks into a room. His movements were unhurried, precise. The face looking back at him in the mirror was composed in a way that should have read as calm, but read to me as something else entirely, the blankness of a person who is finished deciding and is only executing now. He picked up his phone, checked something, put it in his jacket pocket. He walked out of the bedroom without a backward look. He did not pause in the hallway where the staircase was. He did not slow in the kitchen or touch anything. He moved through that house like a man passing through a building he had already signed the lease out on. The front door closed. Sabrina's car was outside at 8 o'clock exactly. I watched it on the exterior camera, a dark sedan engine running parked at the curb with the careful positioning of someone who had been told to be on time. Garrison came down the front porch steps, got into the passenger seat, and pulled the door shut. No embrace. No conversation that I could see. 2 people in a vehicle pointed in the same direction who had stopped trusting each other enough to pretend otherwise. They drove out of frame. The street was empty. Walsh closed the laptop. We went in through the service entrance on the east side of the Pinnacle building, a corridor that smelled of cleaning supplies and recycled air. Accessed with a key card Walsh's contact at building management had arranged. Service elevator to 12. The doors opened onto a maintenance hallway carpeted in industrial gray, with none of the marble and glass of the main floors. The observation room was small, 4 chairs, a narrow counter, a bank of monitors fed from the cameras already installed in the conference room on the other side of the wall. The one-way panel ran the full width of the shared partition, from this side clear. From the other side, a mirror in a wall. I took the chair closest to the panel. Donovan came in behind Walsh and positioned himself to my left without being asked. He stood rather than sat, arms at his sides, watching the empty conference room on the other side of the glass. Eleanor sat in the chair behind me. I could feel her there without turning. Walsh fitted the earpiece into my right ear, checked the connection, gave me a 3 count. She leaned close enough that only I could hear what she said next. "Change of protocol on Sabrina. When you come through that door, she will see you. We've accounted for it. Her cooperation agreement requires her to follow agent instruction, regardless of what she observes in that room. She's been told there may be elements of the operation she won't be briefed on in advance." Walsh paused. What she sees in the next 60 seconds is going to be the most effective thing we could do to her testimony. Shock produces clarity. We're using it. I nodded. She cannot leave the room and she cannot reach her phone. Whatever her reaction is, let it happen. It helps us. I heard the building. Ventilation, a distant phone, the structural silence of a high floor above a city. Then through the glass on the main floor corridor beyond the conference room, the elevator indicator lit up. The doors parted. 2 sets of footsteps on marble, one heavier, measured the cadence I had been hearing cross hardwood floors for 4 years. His voice came through the earpiece directed at the receptionist outside, clear, pleasant, completely in command of itself. "Good morning, Garrison. We have a 9 o'clock. I stopped breathing. The conference room door opened. Garrison walked in and did what he always did in any new room, took a slow, unhurried half-second to register the space, locate every exit, establish the geometry of where he stood relative to everyone else. Then he pulled out the chair at the far end of the table, sat down and smiled the precise, measured smile of a man who believes he is the only person in the room who knows how this ends. I stood 12 feet away on the other side of a mirror and looked at him, and felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, not the residue of 4 years of a life I had believed in. Just clarity, clean and total, the way a room looks after everything unnecessary has been removed. Walsh's voice came through the earpiece, barely above a murmur. "Stand by." The first thing I noticed was his hands. From behind the glass, at a distance of 12 feet, I could see them resting on the mahogany table, flat still, the way Garrison's hands always rested when he was in a room he considered his, not gripping, not moving, settled. The hands of a man who had decided some time ago that visible tension was a kind of confession. I had held those hands. I had watched them draft precise architectural lines on paper and button the top button of his jacket before a meeting and smooth the edge of a document the way you smooth something you care about. For 4 years, those hands had seemed like evidence of who he was. They looked the same now, exactly the same. That was the thing I hadn't prepared for. I had imagined, without realizing I was imagining it, that I would look at him through the glass and see something different, something I had missed, some outward marking of what was underneath. But there was nothing. He looked like Garrison composed attentive, faintly grieving in the careful way of someone managing difficult emotions in a professional context. He looked like the man I had met at a gallery opening 6 years ago and watched walk into the center of a room full of strangers and simply become the most present person in it. I had called that confidence then. I understood now it was something else, a different word applied to a different skill. Walsh's voice came through the earpiece level and low. "Recording is live. We're on." The agent across the table from Garrison had introduced himself as a senior claims manager and had the paperwork, the office issue badge, and the unhurried professional manner of someone Garrison had no reason to question. He walked the meeting forward in the logical sequence of a routine, large policy review, identity verification documentation of the insured event, confirmation of beneficiary details, attestation of no known contests to the claim. Garrison moved through each step with the measured cooperation of a bereaved husband who had assembled his grief into something manageable enough for a business meeting. His voice was right. The weight in it was right. When the agent passed the signature pages across the table, Garrison's hand, I watched it through the glass, developed the faintest tremor as he reached for the pen. Performed. Precise. Completely convincing to anyone who didn't know. Sabrina sat to his left with her hand resting lightly on his forearm, present, but not intrusive, the posture of a supportive friend. She was still. Too still, actually, the particular stillness of a person focusing very hard on not moving. Walsh's voice in my ear. She's shaking. She knows what's coming. I watched Sabrina's jaw. Walsh was right. The final section of the meeting was labeled on the agenda as Final Verification Presentation, a phrase bureaucratic enough to pass without comment. The agent indicated the wall-mounted screen. The lights in the room shifted, dimming slightly at the window end and bringing the display into focus. What came up was not a slide deck. The first image was a still from a restaurant security camera Garrison and a man I recognized from Walsh's briefings as Gerald Alderton, seated at a corner table, a white envelope between them. Timestamp 7 months ago. The second was a phone record call logs between two numbers annotated with FBI case notation. The third was a financial summary, Garrison's name at the top. A series of transfer records below spanning 26 months culminating in a Cayman Islands account balance that represented the document noted in plain language. The systematic removal of assets from a jointly held marital estate. The fourth was the audio waveform of a 40-second phone call with a partial transcript below it. The words "Activate Plan B" were highlighted in the third line. Garrison looked at the screen. I watched his face from behind the glass and saw the moment he understood not that he had been caught, but that the room had been built around him before he walked into it. It moved through him fast, that recognition, and it was gone almost before it arrived, pulled back behind something deliberate and controlled. He set the pen down on the table. Slowly, parallel to the document edge the way he set things down at home. He looked around the room, once taking inventory. I recognized the habit, and then he looked at the agent across from him and said in a voice that was entirely, unnervingly steady, "I'd like to speak with my attorney, now." Walsh came through the side door. She didn't rush. She walked to the end of the table opposite Garrison and stood there, badge-visible hands at her sides, and gave him a moment to process who she was. I watched his eyes move from her face to her credentials and back, and I watched him reclassify the entire morning in the span of about 3 seconds. "Mr. Garrison," Walsh said, "I want to address your request directly because I want this to be clear. You have not been placed under arrest. You are not in custody. You came to this meeting voluntarily at a time you selected in a building that is not a law enforcement facility." She kept her voice even, informative rather than confrontational. "Under those conditions, Miranda advisements are not yet required. You have the right under the Fifth Amendment to decline to answer any question at any time that right exists, regardless of whether you've been read your Miranda warnings. But that right applies to your responses. It does not prevent the FBI from presenting evidence that has been lawfully obtained." She paused. "We're going to continue. You're welcome to remain silent. You're welcome to leave, though I'd encourage you to think carefully about what that looks like on camera." Garrison looked at her. For the first time in 12 feet of glass and 4 years of marriage, I saw his eyes do something I had never seen them do. They hesitated. It lasted 1 second, maybe less, and then the composure came back smooth and complete, the practiced ease of a man who had spent a long time building a face that held under pressure. But I had seen it. Walsh glanced toward the ceiling, the small movement of someone receiving a signal through an earpiece. Garrison tracked it. I could see him tracking it, and the calculation behind his eyes sharpened. He knew something else was coming. He didn't know what. She looked toward the door that connected the conference room to the observation corridor, the door I was standing behind, and she spoke clearly enough that the room microphones would capture every word. "Mr. Garrison, before we proceed to the final piece of evidence, there's someone who would like to speak with you." And she gestured toward the door. Walsh was standing in front of me when I came through from the observation corridor, and she looked at me the way someone looks at a person they are about to send into something that cannot be undone. "It's time," she said. There was no ceremony in it, no encouragement, no final briefing, no hand on the shoulder. Just those 2 words, and then she stepped aside, and the door to the conference room was in front of me. I thought about the night on Route 7, the beeping in the dark, the quarry, the 4 days of living in a room with no name on the mailbox, while the man who had tried to end my life slept in our bed and packed a carry-on bag and signed his own name on documents. I thought about what Walsh had said. "You know him better than any of us." I put my hand on the door and pushed. The room was brighter than it had looked through the glass. Morning light came through the panoramic windows, winter light thin and clear, and it hit the mahogany table at an angle that made the whole surface look like something had been spilled on it. Garrison was at the far end, Sabrina to his left, the FBI agent across from them, the screen on the wall still showing the financial records. Garrison heard the door. He turned, and the thing happened that I had not fully believed would happen. Even after 4 days of preparing for it, the thing I had watched for through the observation glass and been told to expect and still could not entirely convince myself was real until I saw it. His face came apart. 1 second, barely that. The composure that had held through badge flashing and evidence presentations and 40-second phone calls and a demand for his attorney, it fractured completely. And what was underneath was something I didn't have a name for, not guilt, something rawer. The expression of a man whose entire working model of reality has just been invalidated. Sabrina made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then the second ended. Garrison stood up. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried quality of a man who has decided that the only play left is offense. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me, not with fear, not with relief, not with anything I had been trained by 4 years of marriage to expect from him, and he began to speak. "This is a setup." His voice was level, the same voice he used in client presentations, in arguments he had already won before they started. I don't know how she arranged it, but everything in this room, the evidence, the timeline, the coordination with these agents, this is a manufactured case. She disappeared. She made it look like an accident. She's been building this for months to get out of the marriage with the assets and destroy my professional reputation in the process. He looked at Walsh, who had followed me in and was standing near the rear wall. "I will demonstrate to any federal court that the warrant underlying this investigation was obtained on the basis of fabricated evidence. I will show systematic violations of my Fourth Amendment protections, and I will name every agent in this room in a civil suit for unlawful surveillance." He said it the way he said everything, with the architecture of someone who had already blueprinted the argument before opening his mouth. Systematic, load-bearing. Designed to make the listener feel that the structure was sound. One of the FBI agents near the door glanced at his partner. Garrison saw that glance and used it. "She's a photographer. She understands staging. She understands how to control what a camera sees." He turned back to me. "You want to tell them how you got your hands on a federal database for the forged warrant application? Or should we start with the offshore account you've had since before we were married?" There was no offshore account. We both knew that. That was the point. He wasn't arguing facts. He was generating enough noise to fill the space to make everyone in the room have to work harder to hold on to what they knew was true. I watched Sabrina's chair move. Inch by inch, without any dramatic gesture, she was creating distance between herself and the man she had driven here this morning. I let Garrison finish. He ran for about 90 seconds. When his cadence shifted, that small, almost imperceptible change in rhythm that meant he had reached the end of his prepared material and was beginning to improvise, I spoke. "Are you finished?" The room was quiet. He looked at me. And for the first time in 4 years, longer maybe for the first time ever, I saw Garrison Hale in a position he had not planned for. He had no idea what I was about to say. He could not calculate it. He had lost the variable. "I'm not here to argue with you," I said. "I never won arguments with you in 4 years. You know that. I know that." I paused. "But I'm here today because Eleanor has something that everyone in this room needs to see." I looked at Walsh. She raised her chin slightly toward the door. It opened. Eleanor Voss came through it the way my mother moves through any space she enters, with purpose, steadily, without hurry, with the specific gravity of a 61-year-old woman who's been afraid for her daughter for longer than she was able to say and is no longer afraid of anything else. She was holding her phone. She crossed to the center of the room and turned the screen outward so that everyone present could see it clearly. A photograph taken 6 months ago, in the garage of a house on Caldwell Ridge Road, a wall of architectural samples and rolled blueprints and equipment, and in the lower right corner, clearly visible a row of dark blue industrial containers bearing a manufacturer's logo that an EOD unit had matched 11 minutes after seeing it. to the remnants of a device recovered from beneath the driver's seat of a white vehicle on Route 7. Garrison looked at the photograph. His mouth did not open, his hands resting on the table in the way they always rested, flat, still, settled, did not move. The man who had walked into this room 45 minutes ago and owned it, who had held his face together through the revelation of surveillance footage and financial records and his own 40-second phone call, who had just spent 90 seconds constructing a counter-narrative sharp enough to make two federal agents exchange a glance, said nothing. The photograph took up the entire wall. Walsh had connected Eleanor's phone to the room's display system, and now the image I had sent my mother 6 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon, taken in under a second, captioned with something forgettable, forgotten, almost immediately filled the screen from floor to ceiling behind Garrison's head. I remembered the afternoon clearly. Late light coming through the garage window at that low November angle that turns everything amber. The radio in the kitchen bleeding through the wall. I had been looking for a lens cap and found instead the particular chaos of Garrison's construction samples. Blueprints rolled and stacked against the wall, a level leaning against a sawhorse, and in the back right corner arranged with the orderly carelessness of things not meant to be hidden, because there was no reason to hide them, yet a row of dark blue industrial containers, each one the size of a paint, can a manufacturer's logo printed in white on the face. I had framed it wide the whole cluttered scene and sent it to Eleanor with a caption about living with a very organized man. She had replied with a laughing emoji. A completely ordinary afternoon. Walsh zoomed to the lower right quadrant. The logo filled half the screen. Beneath it, she placed a second image alongside it, the same logo photographed in an evidence setting, on a container recovered from the materials used to construct the device found under my car on Route 7. The EOD unit confirmed the match on both manufacturer and product line, Walsh said. She was speaking to the room, but she was watching Garrison. The batch code, visible here, indicates a production run from May of last year. The metadata embedded in this photograph records the date and time it was taken 6 months and 11 days before the incident on Route 7. She paused. Mr. Garrison purchased these materials at minimum 6 months before the device was assembled. This constitutes evidence of long-term premeditated conspiracy. Premeditated. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Garrison was looking at the screen. His mouth was closed. His jaw was set. The expression was unreadable in the way that things become unreadable when someone has run out of calculations and is simply waiting to see what the next second holds. Sabrina looked at the screen, then at Garrison. Then she stood up and walked to the far wall of the room, not running, not making a scene. Just creating as much physical distance between herself and the man she had driven here this morning as the room allowed. She stood with her back to the wall and did not look at him again. Garrison said nothing. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The room held the silence the way a room holds the silence after something structural has given way complete and somehow permanent. Walsh stepped around the end of the table and stood in front of him. She spoke clearly at a pace that left no ambiguity. Mr. Garrison, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights? Garrison said nothing. Walsh nodded once to the agent at her left. The sound the handcuffs made was small. A mechanical click, precise and final the way a lock sounds when it closes on the correct key. Metal against the cuffs of a navy jacket he had put on this morning to go collect money for his dead wife. Sabrina's composure broke the moment she heard it. It was his idea. Her voice was too loud for the room. From the beginning, all of it, I didn't know anyone was going to get hurt. I thought it was... She stopped. The two agents who had positioned themselves behind her were already moving. Ms. Sabrina, one of them said quietly and without force. We'll take your statement at the field office. She let them guide her arms back. Donovan appeared at my elbow before I registered he had moved. Let's go, he said. Low close. Not a question. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder and steered me toward the rear door of the conference room, the one that opened back onto the maintenance corridor, away from where the agents were managing Garrison, away from Sabrina, away from the parts of this that didn't need me in them anymore. I was almost through the door when Garrison spoke. He had turned. The agent holding his arm had paused without meaning to. Garrison was looking directly at me across the length of the room, and his voice when it came was low enough that only the two of us could hear it clearly. You should have stayed dead. Not a threat. Not rage. He said it the way an architect notes a structural flaw that caused a project to fail observationally, with a precision that was worse than anger. It was an acknowledgement that his entire model had required one thing, and that thing was my absence from the world, and the model had been otherwise sound. I looked at him. He was already a different person than the one I had been married to, not because anything had changed in his face, but because I could finally see all the way through it, and there was nothing behind it that I had once believed was there. I didn't answer him. I held his gaze until the agent moved him forward and the door at the far end of the room closed, and he was gone. The maintenance corridor was very quiet. I stood outside the closed door and felt the particular stillness of a building floor that has just had something significant removed from it. Eleanor's hand found my arm from one side. From the other, Donovan waited with his hands at his sides, patient in the way he was always patient. The click of the handcuffs was still in my ears. It was, I thought, the cleanest sound I had heard in 4 years. I looked up. Donovan was watching me with an expression that I recognized the one he wore when he had information that needed to be delivered carefully. "There's one more thing," he said. Donovan's office looked exactly the same as the first night I had been brought here. Same desk, same window onto Greer Mill Road. Same chair across from his where I now sat with a mug of tea I hadn't asked for, but that he had put in front of me anyway, the way people do when they have something difficult to say and need their hands to be doing something first. He placed 2 folders on the desk, one thin, one not. He opened the thin one. That morning, before Walsh and I had walked into Pinnacle Life and Trust, a 71-year-old man named Mr. Haskell had walked into this office on his own. No phone call ahead. No appointment. He lived 3 houses down from Caldwell Ridge Road and had suffered from chronic insomnia for years, the kind that leaves you sitting in a dark front room at 2 a.m. with nothing to look at but the street. On Friday night at 2:30 in the morning, he had seen Garrison in the driveway, flat on his back, partially underneath my car. He had watched for a few minutes, assumed it was odd-hour vehicle maintenance, and returned to his chair. When the news mentioned a car fire on Route 7 involving a vehicle matching mine, he had understood within 30 seconds what he had actually seen. His sworn statement was 2 pages. The handwriting was careful and deliberate. The facts were stated plainly without dramatization, what he saw when he saw it, what he understood it to mean. Combined with Garrison's fingerprints on 2 contact surfaces of the trigger assembly and the photograph Eleanor had provided, Donovan said the evidentiary package was complete. No viable defense argument survived all 3 elements together. I set the statement back down and nodded. The old man with insomnia had seen everything. He just hadn't known what he was seeing until it was too late, and then he had come forward anyway. Donovan opened the second folder. Her name was Rebecca, 31 years old in the photograph taken at some kind of family gathering. She was laughing at something outside the frame, the full face kind of laugh that can't be performed. Garrison had been married to her for 3 years. She died in a single vehicle accident on a state road in Georgia 7 years ago. Mechanical failure, the investigators ruled. The case was closed in 6 weeks. The life insurance policy, $2 million signed 4 months before the accident, paid out without contest. The marriage had been carrying serious debt from a failed commercial project, Garrison's project. FBI Atlanta had been coordinating since early that morning. The modus operandi, the policy timing, the financial pressure, the nature of the accident matched closely enough to establish probable cause for reopening. Modern accident reconstruction and current forensic methods gave investigators tools that hadn't existed 7 years ago. The original ruling had been accident. The threshold to overturn it and file charges was probable cause not proof beyond reasonable doubt. They had probable cause. I looked at her photograph for a long time. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow. She was wearing a yellow dress. These were the details I found myself holding, the small, specific facts that tell you a person existed in particular, not just in general. Garrison had mentioned a first wife exactly twice in 6 years. She passed away. Car accident. It was a long time ago. I had read it as grief I shouldn't press on. It had not been grief. It had been a method he had already used once and found successful. 2 counts of first-degree murder, Donovan said, combined with the explosive device charge, insurance fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Federal sentencing calls for 2 consecutive life terms without parole. Consecutive. Each sentence served in full. The arithmetic was not a formality. I closed the folder and set it back on his desk with both hands resting on the cover for a moment. "Make sure she gets justice too," I said. "Already in motion," Donovan said. I stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was ordinary. A truck at the intersection, someone walking a dog, the gas station sign catching the last of the afternoon light. Harlow Creek on a Tuesday, doing what it always did. Unbothered by what had happened inside this building and inside a conference room in Nashville and inside 4 years of a life I had believed was mine. For the first time, I let myself think past all of it, past the trial, past the testimony, past Walsh's paperwork, to the first morning that would simply be mine. I didn't know yet what that looked like, but the question no longer frightened me. The first snow of the season came on a Thursday morning in December. Small and unhurried, the kind that coats rooftops without committing to anything. I was sitting in the parking lot of a notary office on Clement Street when it started. The car was running for the heat. On the passenger seat was a folder with my name on it, and inside the folder were the papers that would begin the process of ending my marriage to Garrison Hale. Not finalize it, not yet. Tennessee law required 60 days from filing before a divorce decree could be issued, but begin it. Start the clock. I had heard people describe signing divorce papers as one of the hardest things they had done. I understood why that would be true. I also understood that it wasn't true for me, and I had stopped feeling guilty about that distinction sometime in the past 3 weeks. I picked up the folder and went inside. The notary was a woman in her 50s who handed me a pen without ceremony and pointed to the signature lines with the practiced efficiency of someone who had witnessed the full range of human situations across a desk and had learned that the kindest thing she could offer most people was to move quickly. I signed where she indicated. She stamped the documents. I thanked her. I was outside in the cold again in under 10 minutes. The snow was still coming down, light and indifferent. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed in the December air wood smoke exhaust. The particular clean sharpness of cold that has traveled a long way to get here. And noticed that something in my chest, something I had stopped registering because it had been there so long, was not there anymore. Walsh called that afternoon. She was brief in the way she was brief about everything, information delivered in the correct order, no padding. Sabrina had accepted a plea agreement 18 years in a federal facility with the possibility of reduced time contingent on continued cooperation. The agreement reflected the degree to which her assistance had contributed to the arrest and prosecution. Alderton had accepted 12 years for his role in the fraudulent processing of insurance documentation and federal conspiracy. Neither number felt large enough when she said it. Neither number felt small enough. I had stopped expecting the arithmetic of consequence to feel proportionate to anything I had experienced, and that Walsh had told me in one of our last formal conversations was a healthy and accurate understanding of how the system worked. I thanked her. She told me the trial date for Garrison had been set for the following spring. My testimony would be required. She would be in contact. The call lasted 4 minutes. I never went back to the house on Caldwell Ridge Road. A property management company handled everything. The listing, the showings, the negotiations. My attorney, a woman in Knoxville who Walsh had recommended, managed my interests in the asset division proceedings. The house had been Garrison's before the marriage, which under Tennessee's equitable distribution law gave the court significant latitude in how marital assets were allocated. What I received was less than a strict accounting might suggest I was owed. It was enough to start with. My photography equipment, my files, my personal clothing, those had been removed by a moving company while I was still at the safe house, coordinated by Donovan's office. By the time the house sold in mid-December, there was nothing in it that had ever been purely mine. Eleanor had been researching for 2 weeks before she mentioned the lake house. She brought it up one evening while we were eating soup at her kitchen table, sliding her phone across to me with the listing pulled up a small wood frame house on Crestwood Lake, 40 miles east of Harlow Creek. 2 bedrooms, a covered porch that faced the water, an asking price that my attorney confirmed I could manage with the settlement funds and my existing savings, which had been held in a personal account entirely separate from any of Garrison's financial structures, and had therefore remained untouched throughout the investigation. "I thought you'd want to see the morning light there," Eleanor said. That was her entire case for it. We drove out on a Saturday afternoon, the two of us, the lake road, winding through bare December trees. The house was smaller than the photographs suggested and quieter than anywhere I had lived in years. The lake was flat and pewter-colored in the winter light, and the porch faced west, which meant the mornings would come in through the bedroom windows across the water. I stood on the porch in my coat for a long time. "Okay," I said. We moved in before Christmas. There wasn't much 2 carloads of what was genuinely mine, stripped of anything that had belonged to a version of my life I was no longer living. Eleanor helped me arrange the furniture, which didn't take long because there wasn't enough of it to take long. We ordered pizza and ate it on boxes because I didn't own a kitchen table yet. It was the best meal I'd had in months. That first night after Eleanor had driven back to her place and the house was quiet, I sat at the window in the dark and looked out at the lake. The water was black and still, stars reflected in it imprecise and shifting. The wind moved through the trees at the edge of the property, and the house answered with small sounds, the particular vocabulary of a new structure making itself known. I thought about going to check the door locks. I didn't. I sat there until I was ready to sleep, and then I went to bed, and I slept without checking anything. 8 months would pass. Winter would give way to a spring that arrived in stages the way spring does in Tennessee, tentative, then insistent, then suddenly everywhere at once. I would rebuild the photography business from the lake house slowly and then less slowly, until the work felt like mine again in the way it had before I'd learned to make myself smaller inside someone else's idea of a life. Eleanor would have dinner with me twice a week. The porch would become a place I sat every morning with coffee before the rest of the day began. And on a Tuesday morning in July, I would open my iPad to a headline that Walsh had told me in December, to expect the verdict from Garrison's federal trial, delivered after 11 days of testimony. But that was July. That night at Crestwood Lake, all of it was still ahead. The trial, the verdict, the work of becoming whatever came next. That night, there was only the water and the stars and a house that was mine, and the particular silence of a door I had not needed to check twice. The fog was still on the water when I came out to the porch. July in Tennessee doesn't ease into the day it arrives, fully committed heat and cicadas and green air all at once. But at 6 in the morning, there is a brief window when the lake is flat and cool, and the oaks hold the early light in their branches, and the world hasn't started demanding anything from anyone yet. I sat in the chair that had become mine over the past 7 months and held the film camera Eleanor had given me for my birthday in April, a 35 millimeter that had belonged to her own mother. Fully mechanical, no screen, no instant review. You pressed the shutter and committed to the frame, and didn't know what you had until the lab sent the prints back 2 weeks later. I had spent the spring relearning that particular kind of patience and finding that I didn't mind it. From inside came the sounds of Eleanor in the kitchen. The kettle. The cabinet where the tea lived. Small, reliable sounds that I had stopped taking for granted sometime around February. Walsh had texted the night before, verdict expected tomorrow morning. I had read it on the porch with the fireflies coming out over the water, and then I had gone to bed and slept without difficulty, which still struck me sometimes as remarkable. I opened the iPad. The headline was already at the top of the feed plane and factual in the way that verdicts tend to be: Tennessee man convicted, 2 life sentences for murder and attempted murder. No possibility of parole. I read through it once. 2 counts of first-degree murder, the death of Rebecca 7 years ago in Georgia, and the conspiracy against me on Route 7. Premeditation established in both cases. 2 consecutive life terms, each served in full. The article mentioned Rebecca by name. It mentioned that a survivor had testified. A lawyer quoted near the bottom called the evidentiary package among the most complete she had seen in a federal case of this type. I set the iPad face down on the arm of the chair. The fog was lifting off the lake the way it always did at this hour, pulling back from the center, first revealing the water in sections. The color underneath was that particular shade of early July morning that sits somewhere between blue and green and changes depending on where the clouds are. I had tried to describe it to Eleanor once and given up. Some things photograph better than they explain. I did not cry. I did not feel the dramatic release I had sometimes imagined would come with this moment. What I felt was quieter than that, the particular stillness of a question that has been unanswered for a long time, finally having an answer. Not sharp, just complete. The word that came to me was finished. Eleanor came through the screen door with 2 mugs and sat down beside me without asking anything. She set one in front of me and looked at the lake. We stayed like that for a while. "They read the verdict this morning," I said. She nodded. She had already seen it. I told her the thing I hadn't told anyone else, not Walsh, not the FBI therapist I'd seen through the winter, about the night in the safe house bathroom practicing the sentence I would say to Garrison's face in the mirror. How I had cried not from fear, but from grief. For 4 years, I had spent trusting something that had never been real. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "You didn't lose 4 years, baby," she said. "You found out exactly who you are." I looked at her. The morning light was on the right side of her face. The lake was fully clear behind her now, catching the sun in small, moving pieces. She was holding her mug the way she always held things, with both hands, like they were worth holding carefully. I picked up the film camera. I didn't think about exposure or composition or any of the technical considerations that govern my work with clients. I looked through the viewfinder at what was simply there. My mother, her tea, the light on her face, the lake going green and gold behind her in the July morning. I pressed the shutter. The click of a mechanical camera in a quiet place is a small and definitive sound. And then it's over, and the world continues. I set the camera down in my lap and knew without being able to explain exactly how that it was the truest photograph I had ever made. Not the most accomplished, not the best lit. The truest because nothing in it had been arranged, and nothing in it needed to be hidden, and everything was exactly what it appeared to be. The light shifted on the water. I thought about how many frames I had left in the roll and what the dock would look like when the sun cleared the tree line in another hour. I did not think about Garrison. I did not think about Route 7 or Blackstone Quarry or a metal box beeping in the dark. I did not think about locked doors or a phone turned face down on a dinner table or a staircase in March. The lake was there. The morning was mine. Not a single frame of it was already decided. This was my life, entirely, completely mine. There's one thing I learned after everything that happened, not from Walsh, not from Donovan, not from any federal case file, but from a quiet morning on the lake when I realized I was still here. I believe that wasn't an accident. Something greater than anything I can fully understand kept me on Route 7 that night, and I choose to call that the grace of God. But I also have to be honest with myself and with you. I ignored too many signs. I mistook control for care. I mistook silence for respect. I told myself that loving someone meant never questioning them. Family betrayal doesn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looks like the person who knows exactly what to say at exactly the right moment for exactly the wrong reasons. Don't be like me. If something feels wrong, even when you can't explain why, trust that feeling. Boundaries are not a lack of trust. Questions are not a lack of love. And you should never make yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's version of your life. What happened to me was family betrayal in its most calculated form, not loud, not dramatic, but patient and precise, built across years inside the walls of a home I thought was safe. It was family revenge dressed in a navy tie and a practiced smile. And if you think family revenge only happens in movies, I am living proof it happens in ordinary houses to ordinary people on ordinary Friday nights. The most dangerous kind of family betrayal is the one that never raises its voice. My personal take is simple: justice doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it arrives completely. And survival isn't just continuing to exist. It's having the courage to rebuild from nothing on your own terms in a house that is entirely yours. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below and tell me what you're thinking. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to stay for what comes next, you already know what to do. Thank you for staying until the very last word. That means more than you know. A note before you go: the stories coming up on this channel may contain fictional elements crafted entirely for the purpose of storytelling and reflection. If this type of content isn't right for you, that's completely okay. Choose what genuinely serves you. But if you're still here, I'll see you in the next one.